Hi everyone. In lieu of last Thursday's class with my Zoom session, I am posting a video for you of a couple different techniques we used. I couldn't record the actual session because, as you'll see from the PowerPoint, what we did was work in different breakout rooms. So I had the whole class together and we talked a little bit about the goal of the workshop, but then for most of the class, the groups got together in breakout rooms of their choice based on different elements of the essay that they wanted to work on, and then we discussed some Q&A as a class at the end. So since I couldn't film each of the breakout rooms, I'm doing a short session here where I can show you kind of what we did, and you can practice on your own with these same techniques. So we'll go ahead and start here. So we have several different breakout rooms. We have one on MLA formatting, one on intros and conclusions, descriptive writing, thesis statements, grammar and editing, and using general feedback from the course. So I'm going to go through each of those separately, and I will have a timestamp below so that you can find each of these if you would like to skip around. So we're going to start out first with MLA formatting. Now this page is just a reminder of the separate things you want to check when you're going through MLA formatting. So I'm also going to pull up on the screen a sample narrative essay, and I can show you different things that I look for when I'm grading. Now, if you're watching this in the Spring 2021 session, then you will find an overview lesson of basic MLA page formatting in the Week 4 module. And this lesson has everything from a brief overview of the separate requirements of MLA, as well as different resources, including the MLA and Purdue OWL websites, videos on how to do each of these formatting options in both Google Docs and in Word, and then a sample MLA page down at the bottom here. All of the MLA rules are written on the MLA website for you here if you ever need to reference them. And Purdue OWL also has really useful tools like a sample paper that is annotated to explain the different components of a sample paper for you. We're going to go ahead and use this page to start, since it's in your lesson and one you can use there. You'll also notice that these green exclamation points allow you to click and get an overview of what I'm looking for in each section. So for instance, the page numbering should have just your last name followed by the page number, and it should be formatted in the header of the document. The header section is different than the MLA header, and I'm aware that those terms sound exactly the same and might be confusing. So if you need a guide on how to get into your header section, it's very easy. Simply double-click at the top of your page in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs, and that should bring up your header and footer tools. The MLA header are these 4 lines over here. Things I'm looking for: the correct order, so student's name, professor's name, course, and date. The professor's name should include their title. First and last name is generally appropriate, but if last name is all you have, that's perfectly fine. The course should include your CRN number after the name of the course. You can find this in Canvas up at the very top of the page. It's these 5 numbers right after ENC 1101. Last is the date. The date should be written out, and generally we prefer international format, so date, month, year, but this example is also fine. Your assignment should be titled, and they should use title casing, so you'll see an example of that title casing explained here. You want to make sure there are no spaces before or after the title, and that all of your paragraphs are indented. There's a couple more notes here on paragraphs, as well as breaks, margins, and spacing, which should always be doubled. So please go over and overview this section to make sure that you're on the right track, and that will get you started on the MLA section. So we'll go over into the next one. Okay, so intros and conclusions. This is a module we will do entirely based on intros and conclusions in week 11 of the course, but I do think it's helpful to learn earlier, and if you're interested in how to improve your intros and conclusions before then, I've included a link to the YouTube video lesson that we will see in week 11, and it'll be really helpful to see it twice, actually, to get kind of perspective on it before actually getting into that major lesson. But the basic idea of it is that I tell students to think about intros and conclusions a lot like Google Maps. Here's what I mean. So over on the left-hand side here, we have an example of the landing screen of Google Maps. On that landing screen, we get a lot of information that helps us prepare for the journey we are going to take while we're getting from one place to another. So here's a really corny metaphor, but you want to think about your essay like a journey too. And your introduction is like the landing screen of Google Maps that helps us prepare for that journey. So some things I've noted on this landing screen that I've included over here as well, things like where we start out. Now, when you're driving a car, you do need to know where you're starting from, so that's clearly obviously important, but the same thing is true of your introduction. You need to know where your readers are coming from, roughly who they are, and what they're going to need to know in order to understand your essay. So that's building in things like background and context. Your destination is where you need to end up, but in the narrative case, that's the lesson you want people to be aware of during the narrative essay. In another essay, that might be your thesis statement and telling us what your major argument is. So you want to make sure that that is appropriate to the pattern of essay you're using. We have different routes on Google Maps, so you can take different types of transportation, different routes through the city, and you're going to pass things like different landmarks, what else is around, and all of those help build the context for the essay. So there are different ways to reach an audience, different modes of essays you can use, and you want to make sure you're clarifying how you're going to reach your audience and the patterns you'll use through keywords. You want to avoid explicitly stating things like, in this essay I will do. It's just weak writing, and in general, if you remove that phrase, you'll have a stronger essay anyway. Context, things like major landmarks and ideas for a map might be pointing out that you're going to pass the Space Needle on the way to your destination. In an essay, this might be thinking about the major topics and themes you're discussing that helps you fill out the information in the introduction a little bit better. So let's say you're writing about an essay in which your family travels somewhere. Maybe tell us a little bit about your family just to get started. Maybe tell us how often you guys travel in general, or how new to traveling you are, whether you like travel or not, and maybe even tell us a little about the place you live or the place you're going to help us understand why this travel is important to you. Thinking about those major topics and goals can certainly help fill out your introduction. But also, a reader's going to want to know roughly how in-depth or how long your essay is going to be, and you can give them a pretty good idea of that by clarifying the kinds of things you'll cover, and you do that in the introduction. The thesis is really where you give your readers a better understanding of what they're actually going to encounter in this essay, and you'll want to make sure that's in the introduction as well. And then the same is true for conclusions. Conclusions are just kind of the opposite, and I'll pull up a different screen for you. So you may not see this page as often, depending on what you do when you finish getting somewhere in Google Maps, but this is actually their conclusion page. Once you get somewhere, there's a variety of things that Google offers you, especially if you're on mobile. Over on the left, we see it gives us information about the place we've navigated to, things we might need in order to actually use that place, things like opening and closing time, parking, stuff like that. There are questions and answers from other people as well as reviews from other people who've been here. We can see roughly what's in the area, when it's popular. Other things that are involved in the landing screen is sometimes if you go to places like a restaurant, it'll ask if you want to make a reservation. Now, the analogy here for an essay is think about how your reader will use your thesis or your argument or your lesson in their own lives. The conclusion is really the place to open your very personal focus back out to a more universal and global focus. So in your narratives, maybe that's thinking through how the lesson is not only personal but also universal, what kind of things you want people to take away from this essay, whether that's calling them to act in some way, or whether you want them to think about something differently, or maybe change their behaviors, or reminisce about their own lives. Think about what you want your readers to do with your information, and that should help you fill out the conclusion a little bit. If you run up into a spot where you say, I don't know what I want my readers to do, or I don't care, then think harder. Okay. Now, these two should be familiar, but they are here as a reminder that these are important things to look over for your essay. If you want to do the topic sentence test the exact same way I graded your drafts, what you'll do is on a separate document, take your thesis statement and then the first and last sentence of every paragraph and read them through one by one. If your rough idea of your story doesn't make perfect sense step by step in in those sentences, you're probably going to want to revise them. This also reminds you to make sure that your paragraphs are on topic and that you have enough paragraphs. Remember, you want just one major idea per paragraph that you're exploring and preparing someone for with your topic sentence, but you're reminding them about and linking back to the thesis in that conclusion sentence. So this is one way you can go through and check your topic sentences. Transitions, on the other hand, even though they're mostly built into topic sentences, should also occur anytime your setting changes, anytime your topic or your major tone or emotion changes. Those are good places for transitions as well. And they should also happen within paragraphs. So make sure you are using the appropriate transitions. I often have students reach for the very basic ones, first, next, finally. I also have students reach for transitions that feel academic, but oftentimes just end up awkward in writing. Things like moreover and furthermore. If you don't find yourself using those words in everyday life, I would probably just skip them and look for something better. I've included a reference list here so that you can focus on your transitions based on their actual purpose. So the way you'll use this is you will open this page and we have a lot of sample transitions here. If you're looking to make a comparison between two different emotions or topics, these are good ones to use. If you're trying to show that there is a result of something that has happened, try these ones out. So figure out how these ideas are connected, use the appropriate transition, and then that's how you'll move forward. Now, a narrative essay wouldn't be as strong without descriptive writing, and this is an element of the writing that a lot of students struggle with because they don't feel like they're creative. I want to remind you that I'm not grading you on your creativity, just on your attempts at writing and your clarity in presenting your ideas. So try it out. Maybe it'll sound corny, maybe it'll sound lame, and that's perfectly fine. Lame essays, boring essays, as long as they're clear, can still really succeed. So it's okay, it's just an attempt. No one else is going to read this but me, so try it out. But these are some of the ideas that I want you to think about while you're trying to add descriptive writing. You might look up some literary techniques. I have a list down below. You might also try to describe people and places that are important. Settings, make sure to cover things like sensory descriptions. What do you see, hear, feel, smell, or taste? Think about your object. Have you described it well? If it's that important to the plot or the prompt or your character development, then you might as well give it some time. The last thing I want to remind you of is that you should have dialogue in your essay, and it should also be formatted correctly. So make sure you check the dialogue rules here and make sure you are following them as you need. Thesis statements. So this is two different things. Over on the left, we've got a reminder of roughly what a thesis statement should involve. That's our specific topic, our debatable viewpoint about that topic, and why this is significant to the audience. Got a couple notes here that you might want to go through with reference to the narrative specifically. But here's another good thing to try out with your thesis statements. If you can bold your specific topic and italicize your debatable view and then underline your significance, you can make sure that all three of those parts are in the sentence without certain words trying to do double work. If you can't separate those three parts in the sentence, then your thesis may be too vague. Try things out, like if you notice that your topic and your view are running together and you can't separate them, try making a more specific topic, or make sure that your viewpoint is actually debatable. Try asking yourself if a rational person would disagree with this. And then the lesson, make sure that's clear too. Why is it significant for the audience? Sometimes in a narrative thesis statement, your statements are going to be a little bit general because you're talking about your lesson in a personal way as opposed to a universal way, and that's okay. Make sure to review your narrative samples as well to see how they are handling thesis statements and what you can do similarly or differently. Grammar and editing. My first major point here is that I want to remind you that the Writing Center has tutors virtually available for you who can review your essay with you in real time or online and send it back to you. If you want to do that, there are going to be links below in this video that you can access to get help with general writing skills, or if you are a second language learner, we have a fantastic EAP group who helps people with different translation issues and making sure their writing is clear in English. So if that is something you struggle with, we have a ton of help with that. If in general you just want to go through your own essay for grammar and editing reasons, make sure to avoid a few things. The one biggest issue I tend to see is sentence structure. So I see a lot of comma splices, a lot of sentence fragments, and a lot of run-ons. Make sure that each of your sentences are complete, and I know that is probably annoying to look through, but it will improve your score overall if you can make sure to avoid things like fragments and run-ons. Look for punctuation. If your sentences get really long, even if the punctuation is appropriate, you might want to split them up and clarify the point a little bit more. Make sure everything's appropriately capitalized. A lot of us write our drafts and the text speech slips in. Just make sure to review for that stuff. It's perfectly normal. You just want to make sure when you submit academic work that you avoid it. And then the last one I have is look for I statements. In week 1 and week 2, we discussed the basic foundations of academic writing, and a lot of students mentioned that they were always told not to use first person. I think, I feel, I believe. There's no reason you can't use first person in an essay, other than when someone tells you not to. It's perfectly normal to use it in an essay. There's just different situations in which you might want to use it more or less. In the narrative, you're writing about your own life, so it's going to be absolutely normal for you to use the first person. However, statements like I think, I feel, and I believe tend to weaken our writing because they put the focus on the writer's idea or their beliefs instead of on the actual topic of their belief. So for instance, if I was going to say, I think that there should be more parking at Valencia, the literal subject of my sentence is me and what I think, which means that when someone disagrees with that, they are just as able to point to me and who I am and whether or not I'm an appropriate person to be making this statement, as opposed to talking about the issue of parking. My recommendation is to find those statements in your essay and simply remove the part that says, I think, I feel, I believe, and you'll notice that you probably still have a full sentence and it's much clearer and much more confident. Try that out. My last recommendation is about using feedback in the course. Now, one of the best places to find feedback on your work is the document annotations. I went over this in week 2, but here's a refresher. When you go to look at your submissions and your grades, you will often see comments in the submission comments section. That's over here. But what you don't see as easily is this pointless view feedback button. Now, I think Canvas messed up here, and you could have very easily just filled in this giant white space with the document already viewed, but it's not how it is, and so you do have to click this button in order to access your feedback. But you'll notice on that document that I have comments on things like your drafts that point to different areas, maybe highlight sections and comment on them, and that will give you a lot more feedback than just your submission comments and your rubric alone. But make sure also to click this button to see the rubric score so you can see how each individual component was graded, and there may also be comments on your rubric too. You can use your feedback not only on things like the draft and the revised outline, but also on things like the fish cheeks quiz. So for instance, on the fish cheeks quiz, I recommended that people work on explanation clarity. I'm giving you feedback on how well you did at explaining and clarifying things. So if you are struggling to explain someone else's story, you're likely also going to struggle to explain your own. If you find those sections where you missed the mark, what I usually find is that students go, I really know how to fix that. I was just, going through it quickly. So if you do know how to fix that, make sure those same things are skills you use when you're writing your own drafts. And I think that'll help a lot. So guys, that's gonna do it for us today. I hope that this was helpful. Remember that if you want any ideas on your essay this week, to get a hold of either Javier or myself, give us a little bit of time to get back to you. If you do end up finishing your essay more than 48 hours early, feel free to send it to one of us and we can always look over it for you before you submit. So have a great week, guys. Good luck with everything. Don't forget to go back through the modules and look through stuff you've missed. There's plenty of things on those lesson pages that might help. All right, have a great week.